settings as well. Great, sorry. And so our sign language interpreter should also appear as a panelist on your screen. If you have any issues with your experience accessing the captions or interpreter, feel free to send us a message for help. So I'm sorry, you can see I've never done this before. I'd like to first start off with a land acknowledgement. So I'd like for us to take a moment to acknowledge that we gather on primarily Indigenous land. So as a descendant of slaves myself, my ancestors weren't given the choice of where they reside, but regardless, it is our responsibility to recognize the genocide and displacement of Indigenous communities, including the Massachusetts, the Nipmuc, and Wampanoag tribes where I'm located in Boston, as well as honors those of the land in North America that we have the privilege to gather on for many of us. We also recognize that people are joining from all over the globe, so feel free to, we encourage everyone to reflect about your relationship with the lands near you and seek more information. Next, I'd like to thank our sponsors. So we'd like to thank our conference sponsors, including the Allen Institute, the Wu-Tsai Neuroscience Institute at Stanford, the University of Minnesota Department of Neuroscience, and Medical Discovery Team on Addiction, the Alzheimer's Association, Neurosity, and many more. Without their support, these events would not even be possible. So as I mentioned, you're at the Research Beyond Academia Career panel, and I'm really excited to sit down and talk with our panelists. My name is Victoria, and I'm one of the organizers for the Black and Neuro team, and I'm really excited to introduce our panelists. So let's start with Dr. Sadhana Jackson, who is a physician scientist. So if we could just get introductions regarding what you do and your background and information that you'd like to share regarding your career in neuro.
Thank you so much for having me today. So I am Sedona Jackson. I am a physician scientist. I'm specifically a pediatric neuro-oncologist, which is just a long term to say that I care for children who have tumors or cancer specifically in their brain. And I actually lead a research lab. So I do laboratory research and clinical research, wanting to know more about the blood-brain barrier and how it really hinders or prevents therapy from getting to these ugly and very aggressive type brain tumors. So I work at the NIH, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you so much. Now let's next hear from Delissa McMillen, who is a Research Associate Supervisor at the Allen Institute.
Good afternoon, everyone. As I said, my name is Delissa McMillen. I am a Research Associate Supervisor at the Allen Institute on the MFISH imaging team. I'm also the operations lead for my team. So basically, what we are trying to do is to give a whole brain understanding. So we look at the brain through spatial transcriptomics on my team with MFISH. And so we're building basically the building blocks. I know we have lots of discussion in neuroscience about cell types. And so we're trying to get at understanding what basic normal is for the brain. And so my team is responsible for the spatial transcriptomic work that come out of the institute.
Thank you so much. That's great to get a good background information regarding what you guys do. So I think that's a great introduction. I guess we can move into some questions. Apologies, give me just a second. We have our third panelist joining actually.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can, right on
Okay,
time.
awesome. All right, the background's working. There we go. It seems to cut out half of my hair, but that's fine. Hello, everyone.
Thanks so much for joining us. It's actually a great, it's your turn actually to give your background. So
Sure. So I went to school in the UK. I went to Oxbridge College, where basically I did GCSE computer science, specializing in languages like Java, HTML, really early, first generation languages, which got me to work at Barclays at a very early age. And I ended up doing my college education after my professional foray into software engineering. I went to Oxbridge College, which is a top tier university in the UK, where I graduated with the equivalent of, I guess you guys got it, a first class or A or whatever the American equivalent is, and finished my degree in 2 years in computer science. I then went on to head a data warehousing team in the UK. We created the first artificial intelligence enabled data warehouse for Aon, which is a large insurance company. After I worked at Aon, I went to work at Viacom to head their content management division, where I supervised about 15 engineers, 3 or 4 staff members, and a $2 million budget. And then after that, I went through the early stages of a PhD in computational neuroscience and a particular focus on neurocinematics, or the use of cinema in neuroscience. I ended up dropping out of that PhD after a very short period. And I went in to found my first company, Film Funder, which was designed to remove barriers for filmmakers of color using artificial intelligence algorithms to justify budget planning and raise money. I ended up selling that to a small film company. I then made my second company, which is called Sentiment.io, which was focused on programmatic advertising and removing some of the bias that comes with that in terms of how the training data is selected for programmatic images across the internet. That was sold to Publicis in 2018. And then I went on to create Sentiment Capital, which is a venture studio, which I recently sold to XCP&L, which is a Southern print media company. And it's in the process of IPOing as well. So, yeah.
that's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your background. Great. I think we could jump into some questions, and we'll also encourage the audience to put questions in the QA function, and we'll try to ask those as well. But I guess just to start off, this day is really about celebrating, a breadth of careers in neuroscience, as well as the skills that we get from our research training and neuroscience training. So I guess to start with Dr. Jackson, I'd be curious, for everyone, but to start, what are some of the skills that you learned in your STEM or neuroscience training that you're using every day?
Curiosity is super, super, super important. I guess I didn't necessarily learn that in my training, but I use it every day to try to figure out why a certain experiment is not working, or how to troubleshoot for what comes next. Knowing what type of learner I am. So I'm a visual learner. So I learned that. I think I learned that at medical school. So I was drawing things and having to understand pathways. So I would say my learning style, and knowing that at an early stage to be able to utilize that for the important reasons to be able to teach others. So I'm always drawing things for myself to understand. And then I ask other people, can you draw it out, or can you write it out so I can fully understand? So I would say those 2 skills.
I guess I can go. I'm still in the lab, so I use on a day-to-day basis. I use our basic lab skills that we get every day, not only to conduct the experiments that we do, but also to train. It's very important to train and pass on that knowledge in a way that we can move the science forward, because it's no sense building these huge data sets and building this huge base of knowledge if you're not able to share it And so what we've learned throughout education is how to translate that information so that a wide audience can use. So on a day-to-day, I think not only the hands-on work I do, but also the passing on of the information and knowledge.
I think arguably, funnily enough, I do have some engineers who work with me and some data scientists who focus more on the experimentational side. So I think I'm very outcome focused in terms of the skills I've learned in a combination of my education and also, you know, a lot of the research that I've done with various different groups across the country. So it's really interesting because I think neuroscience can have such a financial, a mental, and a diverse impact on various different parts of society, not least in the field that I work in within anti-bias technology, within programmatic advertising. So yeah, so it's a lot of outcome-focused skills that I use. So.
That's awesome. And I know you guys all have varying, you know, how in-depth you are in neuroscience varies with each of your roles. So I think it's interesting that there's still some overlap with how you're learning and communicating things. And kind of with that, I guess a good preliminary question would be, what brought you to neuroscience in the first place? What piqued your interest and things like that? Let's start with Delissa if we can.
You know, a lot of people like to say they have this burning desire. They really wanted to do neuroscience. My story is completely different. My story is simply me and my middle son were running in the hot chocolate 5K, and we saw the building. And we saw the Allen Institute and went about in the process of applying, in the process of learning, and eventually joining the Allen Institute brought me to neuroscience and the understanding of the deficits that we have in neuroscience. I am, by education, molecular biologist, and lots of cancer research in my past. So neuroscience was not my main and driven focus, but the principles I learned in molecular biology covers that and helps in the work I do. So neuroscience is important and driven, but I think that because of my basic fundamentals in science, I'm able to contribute in a meaningful way to the body of work in neuroscience.
I can go next. It's a really interesting story because I did take some small electives on my computer science degree in neuroscience. But it wasn't until working at Viacom and seeing how Nielsen and companies like Nielsen use neuroscience in the rating process of content, what content gets to be seen, what content doesn't get to be seen, by who, why. That's when I became very interested in neuroscience. And I think that it's really interesting because a lot of how we understand everything in media, and to a certain degree in the financial world as well, comes from human conclusion-based understanding. So I think it's really important, especially as people of color, who have a lot of options. You know, there are a lot of smart people on this call, there are a lot of smart people listening to this panel, to understand at some level, it doesn't necessarily just have to be neuroscience, but how and why society has ended up the way it is from almost a modular human perspective, whether it's in medical sciences, whether it's in, you know, media-based sciences, whether it's in physical biology, whether it's in physics. There are all these things that I think if there aren't smart people of color to challenge how certain scientific fields work, then understanding is going to stay the same. In my case, that happened to be media and programmatic advertising and how EEG gets used in media specifically and focus groups, but that can be any field.
And for me, I would say very similar to Delissa, I had a lot of cancer research experience, and I knew I wanted to be in the oncology research space. And I had never had any exposure to neuroscience in my undergrad training at Hampton University, but it was a requirement, of course, for medical school. And I just remember being in that class, and I just loved learning more and more about the brain and just the networks and just the histology and just like, oh, that's what's going on up there, and we still don't know what's going on up there. So for me, I just developed a love or an interest that I didn't even know existed until I went to medical school. so that I knew I was interested in oncology research, but along the line, I was like, neuro-oncology is the way to go. So just, I think, experience and exposure for me.
I love that very much. I think it's quite underrated, the experience of discovering what you like and what interests you. So it's nice that that's impactful. I guess kind of in opening back up to your career trajectories, I want to know more about those moments that you like in your science and that have made your work feel impactful, and what has been really brought you joy in those aspects of your career.
I'll start. My trainees bring me joy, to be honest. Like when they have exciting results, or of course when we publish a paper, that's always great. But they bring me joy because it brings me back to the time of when I was young and generating data and thinking about, and when they come to me like, I need you to help me troubleshoot, or these are the results I got, and does it make sense? And sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't. So I would say a lot of the additional curiosity and motivation comes from young, excited, motivated trainees that are excited about the fact that they have some answers, but many not having answers. And then they get motivated by all the questions that they could potentially answer with the studies that we're doing, or the papers that they read, or going to conferences. So I would say just young minds.
So I was thinking today, how would I best describe what I do? And I think for me, I like to think of my job as I'm air traffic control. And my job as a part of operations lead is I have a focal point of the science we're doing. So we are spatial transcriptomics. So I have lots of different scientists and a lot of different stakeholders who need the endpoint data set. My job is to coordinate it all. And not only coordinate the incoming specimens, whether it's a macaque, whether it's a mouse specimen or a human specimen, whether we're doing an AD or neuro, all these different brain things. It's to manage that, manage inventory, but at the end of the day, it's the RAs doing the work, and to focus in on what do they need to do to succeed. And I think a lot of people think about time what they RAs need to do to succeed is to finish that job. But similar to you, Dr. Jackson, I think of what is going to make them the best scientists down the road. Is it taking a class outside of what we do here at the Allen Institute? Is it going to grad school and increasing them and looking at the whole RA? So the science and the way I look at the science that we do is made better and is improved if the RAs doing the work are improved and made better and uplifted. And also, what do I bring to the table? I am a Black woman and I have a unique perspective and understanding. I have a unique leadership style and a unique understanding. And that comes back from my years of what I do. And so I may not have had classical training in neuroscience, but I have the ability to see the science, to understand the science from the 50-foot level and the 3,000-foot level, and bring that all together for the science that we do. So when it all comes together and that beautiful paper comes out, or the beautiful images that the RAs run to show me, and we're seeing the needle move in science, because that's what I'm here to do, is accelerate science. When I see that needle move in science, when I see that we can make connections with Alzheimer's disease as we move these programs together, that is what makes my work impactful. And that's what being air traffic controller on one day, being the pilot the next day, and some days just sitting down with an RA and going, okay, how can we make you reach your fullest potential?
Definitely. I love that, I think for me, it's really interesting because I did have almost a mini academic career at 2 points. I had an academic career when I was doing my early education on that stage. And then I also kind of did it when I was in the early stages of my PhD before I dropped out. And I think although there was some amazing things that I learned there, there was some amazing advancement that just me being in the room, one of the situations like that was the WHO study, the Alexander WHO study. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with that. And I remember I wasn't on the study, I wasn't running the study, but I was in some of the mentoring sessions and the sessions for research. And I just remember just thinking and asking someone out loud, are there any people of color who are going to be the subject of this overriding massive thing of fMRI that's going to determine how everyone does everything? And somebody told me no. So, that led to later on, I was able to take that same question when my second company became part of the Sprint Accelerator, and they ran a neuroscience study that was going to be used for all of their focus group activity. And I was able to put some people of color in as the subjects for that, which made a big difference. So, there's those big things, there's the small things, listening to kind of Dr. Sadhana and everything that she was talking about in terms of the youth. I did run a program, which is now, I've stopped running it at City University, New York, for different mathematic and neuroscience-based students, and giving them practical experience in the real world with real world data sets. And even in some cases, some of those students landing jobs at Google. And that was very exciting too. So it's kind of that macro of a situation where I can impact a company like Sprint and how they do their focus groups, and the micro of, looking at how students progress to the next stage of their careers.
I think that's great. I mean, we're touching on mentoring a little bit, so I think that's a very important thing that we really like to celebrate in the Black and Neuro community. So, awesome. I mean, I'm also curious about like Micah, you mentioned practical skills. Delissa, I think earlier you mentioned like you use lab skills every day. Like, what are those hard skills that you're using and like those methodologies that you're really tapping into?
I can go first. I think it's really interesting because when you look at something like functional magnetic resonance understanding and the field that came with it and how empirical it was, right? And then we got this huge review of how the data was to be processed, why it was to be processed a certain way. I find that sometimes agile methodologies, when it comes to iterating through iterations of an output or a software, are very useful, right? So if you stick in a kind of a very classical or specifically straight research-based understanding of something like fMRI or neurophysiology or neuropsychology, I think there is something to be missed in innovating how you look at the data, right? So, that's what we did at Sprint. We actually ended up using certain different types of software to cross-reference EEG data with fMRI outcomes. And what we were able to land on was neurosentiment, which is a field that's still in use in universities in New York and some in North Carolina as well. So that's that agile, outcome-based focus, as opposed to rooting yourself only in historical methodologies. I think that's critical. In terms of how that then affects actual software outcomes, actual implementations, I think there is something to be said around using a framework continually versus historical frameworks. So, yeah.
So I'm gonna so as I said, I'm trained molecular biologist. So in the lab every day I use, base wet bench skills. So, we get back to basics in my lab as we move along the pipeline into the process. And I use all the skills I developed. So, I told you, it was like, if you want to be in the lab, basic pipette skills, stuff like that to do. But then also, on a daily basis, so I have a master's degree that specializes in bioinformatics, and I have an MBA. And I use all of that on a daily basis. So you may catch me at 8:45 in the morning, pipetting a sample, getting a sample ready to go image, and then helping the program managers put up financial calculators for projections for next year's budgets. So every part of my entire self comes to the table. And I think it takes a unique person to bring an entire self. And I think we have learned as Black people, we can't be one siloed thing. We have to be many things. And so when I come to the table, I bring all of me. So I bring my leadership abilities, which I honed and fostered in the Army. And I bring my science background, which a lot of years studying in college, but also my day-to-day tactical work, putting in the hours. I always say the Allen Institute has a lot of smart people. I work with a lot of smart RAs, but come on a day-to-day basis, no one's going to outwork me, and no one's going to come to a meeting over prepared as I am. I'm going to come prepared, and I'm going to bring it all every time. And I think we bring such a unique perspective to that we bring it every time. And sometimes it may be a lot, but we don't know how to do anything else. And that excellence comes through in the work that comes out of my lab, is that my team will be over prepared and we will come every time. And so those are the basic skills I think we learn from the jump, from way back. So not sure if I answered your question. That's what I'm going to go with.
Yes, you did. Yes. Did you have anything to add, Dr. Jackson? I do have more questions, but
They said it all. No, no. I was just telling my husband this morning how I kind of had to put somebody in their place yesterday because I had emailed a company about a clinical trial I want to open here to take care of patients with brain tumors, and I had emailed them now two times. I had emailed them the third time yesterday, and nobody had reached back out to me. And I said, "Are y'all running a business or not?" Like, I called them on the phone, and it just reminded me of what Delissa just said, and bringing your authentic self. And sometimes it can be a little bit too much for some people, and it doesn't matter, because as long as you get the job done, at the end of the day, I am interested in curing brain cancer. And if somebody is not answering emails so that I can open a trial to be able to help those patients, then they're getting fussed out in a nice, kind, and respectable way. Even though he said his response was, yeah, we haven't checked our email, but a few of us have been out on vacation. I said, I understand that, but I want to open this trial that utilizes your medication. And if nobody is answering email, that's not good business skills. You're not. So anyway,
retweet.
You gotta put people in their place sometimes.
And sometimes you have to help companies develop in order to get what you want in the endpoint. Sometimes they may come thinking they have a product that's usable, but you have to teach them how to use their own thing. And that's a part of who we are. Mm. We are the innovators. We are the original people who develop. And so it surprises me a lot of times when people, when they see me walking into the room. I challenge you to underestimate me. I challenge you to think that Delissa is going to come prepared. Or I love when I get an email, oh, you don't have to prepare anything for this meeting. Just come on in. My bad. You're telling me to double down. So it's like it's a unique facet. And I think this is why it's important that as Black people, we are at the table. We bring a unique perspective, a unique drive, and a unique understanding. And I think when we're closed off and we're not at those tables, we get these one-sided view of science, and that doesn't serve all the people. So, no, go.
No, I don't want to interrupt you, sorry.
Because I'll get on my soapbox.
But yeah, no, I agree with that. This really speaks to today, when we think about how a lot of the tools, both in neuroscience, digital advertising, all these different interlapping fields are used, a lot of things that were not possible, whether it be how machine learning is used, how certain types of methodologies is used, so certain things that were with the hardware, the way it was designed, what data was incorporated, right? Like for me, what stands out is both in my professional environment and learning environment, I was told sound could not be directly related to EEG data in a way that could be tied back to diverse initiatives, right? And so that was kind of very early, kind of in my startup career, but late in my professional career as a digital operator, right? And then I went out of my way to create a whole field that you can read about online at academia.edu, where sound neurosentiment is related to sentiment analysis, which acts as the bridge towards EEG and fMRI data, right? So I think whenever we get told no, especially as scientists, right, that's when you have to be careful. Because I think it's interesting because when you take, the diverse aspect that we bring to the table out, and you look at medicine that goes back centuries, years, decades, right? You really have people who are willing to perpetuate the same things, because on a cultural level, why would they want to do anything different, right? But whether it's in higher level fields, such as what's going on in the pregnancy world, what's going on in terms of which drugs are administered to who and why, what's going on in how even insurance is built, right? If there aren't, people of color based scientists who bring their expertise to these fields, they don't change. It's that simple, right? So as a scientist in the field, as a digital operator in the field, as an entrepreneur in the field, every time I'm presented with a situation like that where somebody tells me this is the way it is, I want to ask myself, but is it?
I'm really enjoying this conversation because we're getting a little bit into technology too. So I think that's pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean, I want to ask a little bit, that kind of conversation started about, the skills that we're using. A tag on to that is what are the soft skills that you're using in your fields that have brought you and made you successful in the spaces that you're doing your work?
I could start, or
No, go ahead.
okay. I think one of the soft skills that we've learned is how to be balanced, and to be open to new ideas, but then steadfast to what we know can be done in a concerted, direct manner. I think one of my greatest skills I bring to the job every day is I'm able to listen to what everyone has to say, but not necessarily let it change the direction that we're going. We can incorporate things without changing the message or changing the direction. And that's I think it's a learned skill, listening and bringing. So if one person wants it one way and they are dead set determined, but that's not where the science is going. And I guess I don't have a PhD. So in my job, I have a lot of these PhD scientists around me, but bringing to understanding that, okay, I understand your passion and where you're coming from with that, but let's look at the whole science. Let's look at all of it. And I think it takes a skill that's a skill in itself that's just not taught, and maybe it should be.
It's multidisciplinary, right? And I think it's really interesting because multidisciplinary execution within neuroscience, within biology, within physics, within all these different fields, from a commercial perspective, for a long time didn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to teach a physicist how to talk to biologists and for them to interact to create some physics biology driven implementation. But I think the way technology is integrating, when you look at something like recurrent neural networks, right, where you can set a machine to take a task for the next year and just solve it, and you can take that as part of a larger picture, that is very important, right? For my company and for the companies I've made and for where I've worked, I think that's been important from a digital media perspective, from a content perspective, from what works for which eyes and why. What does this do to someone psychologically versus someone else, right? I think, within something like biology, just looking at, for instance, third order alleles, which alleles work for who and why and how and when, that used to be the data to execute around that task used to be a field in itself. But now that can be part of a machine learning practitioner's capabilities, right? So I think this integrated multidisciplinary, way of executing science is really important, because that's where you get the natural hypotheses, right? You can form a hypothesis in a kind of a very limited environment and just, iterate on that one hypothesis until you feel like it's the final version of itself. But when you take, say, biology and physics, and you come to a combined multidisciplinary hypothesis from those two fields about a certain area, that becomes a very large distinctive outcome that I think can even lead down the decision tree to which fields contribute to it, to new assumptions, new information. So I really agree with that. I think that, executing a multidisciplinary lab is a very important part of being a true scientist.
For the soft skills question, I think I agree most with Delissa in terms of listening. I'm one of those people where my brain is always going super, super fast. I'm always thinking about what comes next and how to put out this fire and how not to start that fire. And, and sometimes I find listening very hard. So it's a working process that, of course, I've learned from a very young age, and I'm still working to improve on my listening skills as my soft skill. But I know that it's super, super important, because if you don't listen, it's not just hearing, but listen to what people have to say in your field and not in your field, then you can't fully learn. if you're always just waiting to say, just thinking about what do you say next. So I would say of utmost importance, soft skill listening.
And to bring that back, instead of what I was talking about, which is kind of a hard skill, I'll bring it back to real soft skills. I think for me, managing expectations is a really, really big one, really, really big, because that can mean the difference between, you know, this investor has invested in this initiative in this way, and this is what they expect, and falling short of that. And then that impacting people's perceptions of whether it be POC neuroscientists, Black neuroscientists, or scientists generally. That I think is such an important, especially when it comes to financial deadlines, resource-based deadlines, that, you know, I've definitely learned that lesson. I think it wouldn't, you know, set back any scientist to learn, okay, this is what I said I would deliver, no matter how efficient your conclusion is, right? Because you could come up with a new breakthrough in a whole new field, but if you did it past your deadline and a lab has allocated resources for that, then, you know, it's great. And you get a lot of white papers and a lot of recognition, but that lab is now short resources that can't go to someone else to do something similar. So managing expectations, that's a soft skill, as well as listening, and listening to managing expectations is a big one.
That's why you need someone like me. I'm air traffic controller. I manage the skills, manage the calculator, manage the science, and make sure we get it out in a timely manner. You know, one of the biggest things that I've had, it's sometimes difficult, but say no. No, saying no is a skill that many of us have never been taught. And sometimes it can be difficult, especially in the work and in the lab, because you want all the straight science and you want to do and do and do. But sometimes saying no, in order to produce the best science, in order to produce happy employees, I need to say no. And we're going to have to measure it. And I think, you know, listening, saying no. And we want to talk about hard skills. You know, I'm always surprised that people don't understand how to make a simple calendar and how to plan out and schedule out their day and their time. Because if your time is invaluable to you, mine is to me. And being able to develop that out is a skill that I think we need to, when we bring people in, to teach them, hey, here's your Outlook calendar. Let's start populating it in a meaningful way. So there's lots of skills that we learned in passing, and then some should be, I think, dedicated learning taught.
Delissa's over here dropping those gems about time management skills, because I can be so anti-meetings, because don't waste my time. If I can say it via a Teams message or a Zoom chat or like it's an email, not even Zoom chat, because that means I would need to be in the meeting too. But tell me what I need to do. I will take care of it, and we will convene again via email again if that's necessary. But please respect people's time. So time management is super important when you have deadlines and when you don't have deadlines. So thank you for bringing that up as a soft skill.
Yeah, that resonates with me too. The calendar, learning how to use the calendar was one of my strongest skills that I've gained from working, you know, so, and it really does change dramatically if you're transitioning from academia to industry and things like that. So, yeah, thank you guys all for answering my questions. Feel free to drop questions in the Q&A and I will try to get to those as well. Actually, we have one. I'll ask this one. Because the field of neuroscience is so interdisciplinary, as mentioned, with other subjects such as computer science, math, psychology, it can seem difficult to hone in on something specific in the field when just starting. How did you guys hone in on your specific careers, and what things did you realize were not for you?
For me, in the medical community, it's encouraged for us to shadow or have exposure to various clinical disciplines, scientific disciplines. So just me having the exposure to various aspects of medicine made me know, I can't do this all day, versus, oh, these, specifically the pediatricians, because I'm a pediatric neuro-oncologist, these pediatricians seem like they're happy to come to work every day. Like they have themselves together, they're excited to talk to the kids and teach us as students. And I could resonate with their everyday lifestyle, whereas I couldn't necessarily resonate with some of the other clinicians and clinician scientists that I was exposed to. So I would say for me, it's just a matter of exposing yourself to the various careers. Of course, that requires networking. So who you know or who knows who to get you in those spaces, to get you in those labs, to get you in those industry spots, to be able to have exposure is just clutch so that you can know what's for you and what's not for you. And if your mama or your daddy wants you to do a certain aspect, that's good for them, but you need to know what excites you and gets you up in the morning and gets you not want to go to sleep at night because you're still thinking about how to do this or that. So I would recommend exposure, exposure, exposure.
I think one of the best things about my position is that I can change. I can, in my career, I can morph. I can go from cancer research to neuroscience, and I can go to immunology, and I can go virology because I have a base set of skills that's useful in many platforms. And I like thinking about many other things. And one of the things that I really love about working here at the Allen Institute is that we have several different institutes. And sometimes I may want to do immunology. And, you know, I helped immunology on their on studies, and I can go up there and use those skills and learn those skills. And, you know, we have a great cell science department, and I can go and see what they're doing there and learning. So being a part of when you're looking for that opportunity, that job, placing yourself in a position where you are not pigeonholed or you're not siloed into just one thing, but you can move, and there's flexibility in that. And the people you're working with or you're working for is generally concerned about your growth and your development. I say it all the time, I'm hard to manage. I am, it's very hard to be my manager because I want to not only be great at what I'm doing, my responsibility, but I want to know the external things, and I want to keep growing and learning. And so trying to pigeonhole, hey, Delissa, we need you to control this and do this is not, one, useful because I have more skills and I need to grow. And I think some of the best managers have said, go out and learn more and move, but also be good at what you do. And so I think that that is important.
No, I agree with that so much. You know, I remember, so I was a software engineer first, which is probably to directly answer the question, like you want to choose a specialization first, you know, as Delissa was saying. And I think that specialization gives you that flexibility because you can build something on top of that. So that is kind of directly answer the question, but kind of to the undertone of the question is really like, what do you want to do? And how do you get to do that thing whilst having flexibility? I think that's really the heart of the question. Because, you know, I think there are so many, you know, Black neuroscientists, Black software engineers that I know at different, you know, top tier companies, and they're in one place doing one thing, right? So I think, especially when it comes to neuroscience, it's essential to have what Delissa said, this multidisciplinary cross-ability based thing. In my case, that was starting as a software engineer, really focusing on neuropsychology first, and then really landing on neurocomputational outputs. You know, which is where my software skills could meet my neuroscience skills. And then obviously I've been able to build businesses on top of that, which is a whole different skill set. So yeah, I think it's really about, if you have some lack of clarity about what you want to do, find something you can do and then do it on top of that.
I would add in too, give yourself grace. So if there was something that you were excited about and you had exposure to, and you're like, this is it, this is what my thing is going to be, this is my jam. And then you get into the thick of things and you're like, this ain't it. That's fine too, because you're a human being and you can change your mind. So be able to give yourself grace and remember to give yourself grace, because sometimes things change and that's okay.
Yeah, I like that because, hey, I started right out of undergrad. I started in a virology grad program, a PhD program, and I walked out and joined the Army. You could not have gotten more further away. It was like, I remember the day I was in biochemistry titrating and I was like, yeah, nah, I need, and this is something else. And I joined the Army. Shocked everyone because that was the trajectory that my father thought for me. I was going to be a doctor. I was going to do this. And I was going to, there was a plan for Delissa. And I didn't see that plan for myself because I wanted so much more. And joining the Army gave me a space. It gave me space to think, because once you join, you're there. And so it gave me a space to think, what did I want? What did I love? So I tell people my journey to neuroscience, my journey to science was about finding who Delissa was and how she impacts science and how she impacts other different things. So I love what I do, but I know that change is just a stone's throw away to something greater.
I love that. I love that so much. I think it's a fairly unique trajectory that we don't really get to see highlighted a lot. So I'm really happy about that. A question I want to ask for anyone: how do you approach challenging situations in your research? I don't know if anyone wants to go first, or I can pick someone.
Define challenging.
We
You've got to
know
get
what
more
a
specific.
challenge
That's a
is.
lot of research. Just going through chat. So we'll define challenging.
I mean, difficult, you know? Yeah, I mean,
Question or the people?
Every day is a challenge. Every day is a challenge.
so perhaps around work culture, perhaps around the people, perhaps around like your project. I feel like there's a lot of different ways we could go here. People might be interesting, but
Listen, I go by one philosophy when dealing with people. I can work with the devil and still not react. That is my philosophy in everything. I can work, I can do the best and give off the best. I don't care what energy you're putting off, but if my science will speak for itself, the work we put out will speak for itself, you can give up. So difficult people to me, that's their own thing. Now, when I'm dealing with difficult science, I am give me a textbook, let me go back to basics. Let me figure this out from the bottom up. So I'm going to, if there's a question, or a new technique, I'm going to find that textbook, because we have textbooks, we have libraries. I will search in our research. I'm the type of person that I need to come to the table prepared, and I need to be the one to I may not know it, and I'm not too ashamed to ask the questions. I'm not too ashamed to go to someone and say, hey, I have no idea what you said in that meeting. Can you shoot me that paper? Can you give me the notes that you just took and help me out? I think if it's difficult, going out and finding the answers and asking those smarter than you for the answers.
I think that's a good way of putting it. I think it's all in the word hypothesis, right? Which I believe is derived from some Greek word hypo, and hypo just referred to the way water progressed, right? I think the science, if there was some beautiful world where we all got $1 billion as scientists, we would be able to figure out absolutely anything. But I think the issue is that we don't have that. And there are these very real things in the world of science that, impact how the science gets executed, approached, interpreted, and released, right? And I think a lot of that is to do with people, different agendas that different people have, different organizations, how they fund things, why they fund things the way they do. So I think the question is less, whether the science is difficult, because, it's just like Delissa said, if we have the right mentors and we have the right resources, most people can figure out anything, especially scientists. But it's about, how do you find a situation where maybe the organization funding your research isn't an organization with exactly the right lined up incentive system as you, right? And I have been in that situation, and I've found that both the people associated with that situation, the organization, the culture that comes with it, it's all about perspective, right? I think if you have an organization that's funding your research that way, it's about showing them the perspective of where you're coming from, how that contributes to maybe their end goals, even if they seem to be completely different, and keeping the program going if that's what you want to do as the lead scientist on the project. And then it's, again, beyond perspective, I think it's also about intention. I think there is this kind of hard wall if an investor or a company or a funding organization and the science and the scientists and the team behind them are going in such different directions, maybe that isn't the right, sponsor for that project. And I think there's definitely something to speaking up and saying, hey, maybe we don't match on this project. Maybe it doesn't make sense for whoever this organization or this investor is to fund this project. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think that's a really important thing, especially as Black neuroscience operators, Black neuroscientists, Black neuroscience experts, because the nature of what we do research on, even if it isn't necessarily directly related to things that massively seem to affect us, can really decide where we're going, what we're doing, the teams that we supervise and what they are doing and why. So I think a lot of it really does come down to intention. A lot of it really does come down to outcome, and everything kind of springs from that, personal disagreements, people, their personalities, the culture. That's really all it comes down to, because you can have seemingly, the worst investor or organization funding your research, and your research is exactly what you want to work on. And maybe the reasons that they're funding it are very different to the reasons you want to work on it. But ironically enough, you can end up in a situation where two seemingly disparate data points can meet. But also the converse is true. Maybe you do have, seemingly the right way leaning a political organization funding what you're doing, but the intentions as to why they're doing it are very different to what you want the research used for. So.
For me, I would say being bold and thinking outside the box are ways to get around challenges. We all stated how we do come to work with our authentic selves, and to be able to speak up for ourselves and to speak up for others. It's just super important to be able to overcome challenges, because I've been in circumstances where I've kind of like made myself smaller to kind of get through a situation, but I found myself pretty sad and depressed and frustrated at the end of the day. And it wasn't until I said, this is not a me thing. This is the environment type of thing that is malignant around me. Let me be bold, be my authentic self, speak up, speak out, and make changes where I can see to make changes. So in terms of how to overcome challenges, people, places, situations, being bold and being strategic with the boldness is super, super important. So just because you're doing something or moving a certain way doesn't mean you need to tell people. You be strategic about who you tell, when you tell, how you tell, where you tell. So bold and strategic.
Retweet.
And know your worth. Know your worth. I think I'm still working on that. When we pick our careers, we have to know our worth and know how much we bring to the table, because no one's going to ease readily. Oh, you bring all this, you're doing all this. Let us give you the compensation that you deserve. So I think in order to elevate not only yourself, but be able to bring up people behind you, we have to know our worth and establish our worth. And I'm saying this, and I'm telling myself it as I'm saying it out loud. So it's important we know our worth and bring that to the table every time.
I think that's so important. I think some people talk about that from the motivational speaker perspective. It's not, right? If you go into a situation, and I've been in these situations where everything seems to be against you and twisted and upside down and left and right, and you come in and you just know your worth and you know what you're there for, one of two things happens. Either you leave because you know your worth, right? Or usually this crazy upside down left and right things happen where people give you exactly what you're asking for. Because, as I was listening to you say that, the economy, capitalism is not set up for people to know their worth, right? Because if everyone knew their worth, we'd all have, 100 acres of land and we'd all be millionaires. But that's not how it is, right? So I think that is such a incredible thing, because if you really internalize that and you take steps in your life, whether it be self-healing, time, whatever it may be, to actually really get there, it changes everything.
I love it. I love it. Great. More questions about, research in your respective fields. I'm curious how you continue to innovate in the settings that you're practicing research or things that you're doing in your work. You want to go first? Yeah.
For my field, the field of neurosentiment, which is a combination of sentiment analysis, polarity, the words that come with words, and neuroscience, right? And whether you're using the feature space of an exact EEG sample to match a word, or you're using a sound, or that's triggering an output, or the myriad of different permutations of the way that can happen. Machine learning has really changed this field a lot, right? When I started working on these projects in 2015, there was what was called supervised machine learning. That was the prevalence, things like the support vector machine, things like decision trees, right? And that meant it took sometimes months to go through petabytes of sound and neuroscience informational data to figure out conclusions and build software on top of that. Now, with things like unsupervised learning, quantum computing, which is available through IBM Watson, a lot of the projects, like our kind of flagship project, which we call BrainRap, which is a combination of an EEG headset that you can use to make music, and also software that can help you make music, which then contributes to creating data corpuses that remove bias in media. Like, that project is only possible with these tools, right? So that in terms of how I think the bias side has progressed, it's very interesting, because, bias in your training data sets used to be a dirty word. Everybody used to say, I did my training set this way, I had this methodology, I got rid of these double negatives. Today, it's an accepted part of the machine learning output process, right? And I think that's very significant, because I think the second I saw it shift from, okay, why is recidivism risk happening in these judges because this data is very, very corrupted, to these Uber cars can function differently because, our Q score is completely different, our L scores are completely different. I think that was a very interesting shift. And, having seen that personally, in some ways it's great, because, the things that I think myself, and it's safe to say everyone else in this panel and everyone listening care about, have also received some attention, some resources. But I also kind of worry that the language has shifted so much so that, the term bias has been kind of hijacked, if you want, a little bit, and turned into an everything. So, within neuroscience, sound-based neuroscience, semantic tools, that's kind of what I've seen.
So changing. So I'm creating, along with the team, we believe in team science here. And so we create these huge pipelines to produce these massive data sets. And so on a given day, what I'm doing is trying to build the infrastructure and build the tools. And so a lot of the things that we do, we don't keep in-house. I think it's important as we move neuroscience, whether it's neuroscience, immunology, or cell science along, is that we spread we pass it out. So my contribution is to build reproducible, great data that scientists can use and then push it out to the world and give it to the other teams along our pipeline so that they can push it out. I think, and this benefits especially underrepresented minority scientists, whereas the funding isn't always going to be there to give multi-million-dollar grants to them. So if one scientist doesn't have to do a single sequence procedure over and over, but they can go to the Allen Brain website and they can pull that data and move their science ahead and help them, that is where we contribute. If they can look at the spatial data that my team is putting out there and they don't have to reproduce it in their lab, and they can come with the questions that they bring and move it ahead, their science ahead, I think that is the greatest success for what I do on a day-to-day basis. It's helping the next science on the line to accelerate their science and help humanity as a whole to move science ahead.
Changes for us, I would say, are reflected in networking. So we network with other scientists in our field and some that are not. Network at conferences, network online via Twitter and Black at Neuro type chats, just seeing what is going on in the field of neuroscience, neuro-oncology, oncology, cellular biology, just networking to see what's been published, what is coming down the pipeline, and then taking those readings and taking that research and say, oh, we're on the right track, or let's think outside the box and think of this in a different way, because in a totally different disease set, but similar type of cells, they did this. So to always be open to what's available and what's possible, and knowing that everything is possible. is kind of what allows us to change and pivot and be able to have positive results of the change.
Awesome. That's great. Sure, let me just find our next question. Actually, to start with Delissa, so you talked about like team science, and this is often not the focus of many other parts of academic culture, which can be very individualistic. So what do you see are the benefits of working in a collaborative manner, the way you're describing?
It's not all on me. I think a team approach builds where I can have an idea or a thought, and I can turn around and go to our MPE, our engineering team, and go, I have an idea of a tool to help make my process easier. Can you help me come up with this? Because I may not have the engineering skills, but I have an entire team, a part of my bigger team, that can help me move this, can help me do this. Because what we do here on such a big scale, we can't buy a lot of this stuff off the rack. It has to be thought of, it has to be created by a specialized team. And so team science, when people think, they think about a couple people working together on a particular topic, we think, at least I think of team science as the different teams. So engineering work, I work with the engineering team. I work with data technology team to push the data out later on. And it's all these teams working together to make this process. And to put it there, so working, and I think it's a lesson that a lot of other institutions and a lot of other things have learned, that being siloed, and a lot of scientists being siloed and concentrated doesn't necessarily produce the best science in a timely manner. I'm not sure if I answered your question again.
Yeah, no, you definitely did. I think that's great. And the emphasis on a timeline is a different challenge related to non-academic research sometimes. So
yeah, I think team science a lot, when we look at it, I think we always, when we think of scientists, yeah, let's be real. When we think of scientists, we think of the PhD scientists with the lab coat in the lab doing the thing, and then there's the paper at the end of the thing. Yes, PhD, but that's not always the pathway for everyone. And it shouldn't be the be all end all, because I'm a scientist without the PhD. I put out great science work. I just use a different method of doing it. And having all these teams. So I work with people, with engineers, with mathematicians. I work with computer software to develop, when we develop those, the different, I lost the word. When we develop the different platforms or the software that people come to look at our data. Those are software engineers. There's teams who do so many other different things, but with one goal, to put out all that neuroscience data to share it with the world. And so I think you don't always need that necessarily, that objective where we're going to reach, everybody's trying to reach for this PhD, which is not, so some is really not obtainable. But there's so many different jobs where you do great science, you can be a part of science without necessarily that one thing. Education is still important. Let me put that out there. You know, we have that baseline of knowledge and that baseline understanding, but it comes in many different facets and many different ways and looks.
I like what Delissa said in terms of collaboration, and just to add on to that, I was thinking about how important it is to understand your metrics of success. So to understand your personal metrics of success, because for some people, and it's right exactly for them, the amount of papers that they crank out, that's what defines success for them. For others, it's how many cool people have I met in my field along the way that have inspired me to continue to do great work? And of course, I'll have some papers along the way, or I'll have even more collaborations along the way. But one person's definition of success and the metrics around that success may be totally different than another person's. And so that's important to know for yourself first. And then secondly, if you're going to collaborate with somebody else, one other person or another group, what is the definition of success for you to have a productive and fruitful collaboration? And then how are you going to get there? So what are your metrics and timelines around that? So for me, I tell all my people, okay, what does success look like for you? Especially my trainees. And they're like, okay, I want to crank out papers. Okay, you crank out papers, but what comes after the papers? Do you want to go into industry? Do you want to stay in academia? Do you want to work for the government? Do you want to open up your own company? Because what you define for you and success is what you define for you and success. It's not for anyone else.
Yes, I love all of this. I mean, I think we're hearing some things we're circling back to a lot of the similar things. And I think that's a positive thing that we're overlapping. So I guess a question to start with for Micah, when you talk about your background as a CEO and getting startups, what do you feel like are the qualities that it takes to become, and we've also talked about like leadership styles for Delissa and Dr. Jackson as well. So I want to open this up. But what are those qualities that you feel like are important?
Well, that's a great question, because before I was in the startup world, I was more of a research focused data operator. That's what I call it, right? And then, when I started the process of going through my PhD at Fielding University, that's why I went into it. I saw an academic timeline for my entire life. And that's where a lot of the research, even today, that my team and I build on, it comes from that time. But the thing that I really realized, which I think every person has their own path, but for me, for the goals that I had, wanting to look at bias in media and change it and do something about it, and how bias in media directly affects the pockets of people of color, Black people in the media industry, whether it be artists or people at some of the highest levels even. I realized that was in the business world. So for me, it was very important to get into that world, understand it. And at the beginning, I had no idea what the startup world really was. We see all these massive press releases for people raising all this money, and we hear about venture funds and we hear about all these things, but it's kind of a mystic world. And the number one thing that if you're going to work at a startup, there's a variety of roles, there's a variety of disciplines. A lot of even what you build in the academic world can translate directly into a research post at startup, which is incredible, right? And you can make a lot of money from that. You can make, high six figures from that. But if you want to run a startup, own equity, and in the case of Sentiment Capital, is currently in the process of IPOing on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and hopefully we hope to do the NASDAQ next year. It's really about resilience. It's really, there's a lot of people, there's the Lean book, there's Gary Vaynerchuk, there's all these influencers who you can go and read, and that's great, but it's really only singularly almost about resilience. And if you have something that works, which I did before the technology was even there to support it, before the will was there to support it, before the investors were there to support it, and I look at some peers around me, I have two friends of mine just raised a $25 million fund. There was Harlem Capital, that just come out. It's all about that singular resilience. I know I sound like a broken record here, but you are going to get the 100 investors who say no and that you have a terrible idea. You are going to get people who don't want to work for you. You are going to get these difficult, especially as Black founders, these difficult funding situations, right? Like all of that is going to come at you, even if you went to Harvard, even if you went to Yale. So other than resilience, the second thing I'd say is knowing your worth. I go back to what you were saying, because you have a lot of founders who they raise the $1 million, they raise the $2 million, and they raise it at 50% of their company. And this is one of the reasons there aren't more Black-owned companies that work in the fields, whether it be media, whether it be certain types of medical practices, and whether it be all these different fields where we wonder where the Black founders are, that's what happens to them, right? They give away a lot of their company, they stop running it, someone else ends up running it, and then you never hear about those founders again. So it's really only two different things. It's resilience and it's knowing your value. And then if you happen to be lucky enough to execute both of those things well enough to get to the point when you are successful, right? I think the most important thing is to give back. There's really only three values, right? Like, for instance, you know, before I was even at the level of success I am right now, I started the CCNY Codes Initiative with 3 other people. And that put 400 kids in software engineering jobs within the year. So I plan to, you know, work on what we call the US Tech, which is the United States Technology Education Initiative, which is something that my charity is putting together. To basically get 400 neuroscientists trained at the PhD level who are Black within the next 12 years. So, you know, those are my initiatives, but a lot of that comes because in the midst of that resilience, I did have many people who looked like me who came to my aid, usually with not massive amounts of money, but they did help me at situations and times where things were difficult. So it's really just those 3 things. And if you feel like you can't, it really is better to stick to a classical career, because the startup world will come at you pretty hard. So.
Who's taking notes? I need these life lessons. Yeah, I'm alive between this, right? So I have it for posterity, you know, for research purposes at a later date. Okay.
But that's me. That's what I'd love to hear from you guys. I'm sure you have equal lessons. So, but if anything, just resilience. If you were going to decide to go in front of people and say my idea is good enough to raise money. So
I like that. Definitely resilience is super important because you're going to get a lot of pushback throughout your whole life. And I can only speak to that as a woman of color, that I've received a lot of pushback and kind of stares, kind of like, who does she think she is? And then I say something that is brilliant, and they're like, oh, that's who that is. Like, like we shock them, you know? And it's like, if you don't sit down somewhere, like I'm supposed to be here. So yes, all of that, of what has been said, to know your worth, to give back, to be resilient. I agree with all of that. I don't have anything further to add other than some experiences of my own. So.
Can you imagine how far we would be if we didn't have to deal with some of that, with every time we walk into a door having to prove that we even belong coming in that door? How much more?
I think
How much further?
I think about that from time to time. And I also think about how much sharper we've become because of the fact that we have had to adapt and to become resilient and to fight back. So there are like always 2 sides to the coin, where it's like, oh my gosh, how much more open would my mind be if I did not have to tackle both macroaggressions, microaggressions, discrimination, and ignorance. And the flip side of that is I tackle macroaggressions, microaggressions, discrimination, and ignorance. Therefore, I am this grand, brilliant Black woman. So I can only tell you from what I am and from what experiences I have on a daily. And I fully believe that we are where we are because of what we have had to go through, both our ancestors and us, and everything that we have had thrown at us, both positively, negatively, or neutral, has prepared us for this moment right now. To be on a panel, to be listening to a panel, to be able to contribute to others, to give back, to be resilient, all of that. So it's like you have to take the bitter with the sweet to be able to be your best self. And I don't like going through macroaggressions and microaggressions and discrimination and ignorance.
And preparing, you know, part of my job is preparing my replacement, and and preparing the next person. So sometimes, I feel this weight of, I can't fail because the next person can't come through that door that I've just somehow slipped in. And I think when we look at our careers and we look at things, it's not only what we have done for ourselves, it's preparing and laying that foundation for the next person. And it's difficult, it's hard. I am lucky that, see right here, I have BASE, which is a group here at the Institute where I can tap, I can tap Alice, I can tap you, and I can go, I need a moment where for me, I'm not Delissa. I am not the supervisor. I'm not the lead. I need to breathe. And I think sometimes we need to give that to ourselves. So as we're building these great pipelines, as we're building and putting out this great science, we give ourselves that moment to breathe. Just like you said, Dr. Jackson, that space and grace, we have to give it to ourselves because no one else is going to give it to us. And so as we build and we develop for ourselves for the future, as we create these spaces where we are our authentic true self, that we don't lose ourselves in that development.
I think it's important to note, you said something about failure. There really isn't a timeline where you, Delissa, or anybody on this call listening or otherwise contributing is going to fail. Period. Because the definition is more of, I'm going to take a pivot or I'm going to learn from this mishap. But failure, no, baby, that's never happening. What you're going to do is you're going to learn from what happened and pivot. So it's never going to be a failure. So I want you to take that out of your vocabulary of, I can't fail, therefore this next person. You definitely can go through and create experiences for yourself where maybe your idea of winning is that you didn't win, and you learn how to adapt and overcome for the next experience. But failure, baby,
There's only iteration. Say it like the Silicon Valley bros, fail fast and fail quickly. Spend as much money as you can on going to Saint-Tropez and buying a car and then just get another startup and do it again. Why can't we have that?
We don't have that Saint-Tropez money though, Micah. So
why not? Why not? Don't say you ain't got nothing. You got everything that your ancestors gave to you. You got a research paper. You got money inside pieces of paper. You got it all. There's nothing you don't have.
I work for the government, Micah. So the way my checking and the way my savings is.
Well, you know what you need to do? You need to get a super PAC.
Okay. Let's talk offline.
That one.
I want to join that conversation offline.
I need that Silicon Valley energy. Thank you very much.
I just genuinely think, in my story, there are a couple times where I was like that close to everything just falling apart. And in those moments, I literally just thought to myself, I'm like, okay, like if I can see all these people succeeding, even if it's the illusion of success, because that's what Silicon Valley mostly is, right? Why at this point is this any different from when I was at my most successful? And, whether, a good book for people who want to get into the startup world or want to succeed is Sun Tzu's Art of War. There's so many of these military movements where he is like that close to everything falling apart, and then he just pulls it and brings it right back. So if you're cleaning Berkeley, if you run the lab, if you're in the Army, if you're in the Air Force, you can really do anything.
And you think about what our ancestors had to go through. This is nothing. And we are standing here because they went through their own turmoil for us to be able to be brilliant and to be able to give back. So just super thankful.
I would add one last thing. Everybody in the chat, write a positive word. I want everybody in the chat to write a positive word. I actually mean that. I would like everybody in the chat to write a positive word.
I think it's important. I think a lot of the times we go forward and we do things. Like I try to teach by example. I teach my RAs by example. If I am willing to clean up the spill on the floor, everyone should be a part of that process. And I think that we learn together, we grow together. I don't know where I'm going with this thought because I just had like 4 other thoughts come
it's just
in my
overall
mind.
Everything can work out. Nothing can stop you. You are completely wherever you start, where you end up is you are completely unstoppable. You can do anything, especially if you're Black.
Listen, I have, I'm interviewing now. So anyone who's looking for a job, I'm hiring. I'm looking for 2 RAs from my team.
Me
And
too,
I-
actually.
and
I need about 10 software engineers by this time next month. So seriously.
and as I sit,
Scientists in my lab too. So look, we're all hiring. Hit us up, direct message us, email us. We want you. So we need you. I love that. Yes.
and you know, I see a difference in applications, and I see when I have these interviews. First, there's always that when someone sees who it is interviewing them, there's like, oh, I'm here to interview for, yeah, you're in the right place. And then it's like, but it's the boldness they bring, the boldness some people bring. Who are you really qualified to bring that boldness to me? And
That's the thing.
if we can harvest, if I can harvest a quarter of the boldness that some people bring to me when they are not qualified, it's amazing the things that we could revolutionize and continue to move forward. I think as we develop, as we build, I want the young Black scientists listening to us right now, those who are preparing and those who are growing and finding their path, to understand, you know, we've all said it, to be bold, to be courageous, to be curious, and know who you are, and figure that out along the path, and, you know, change, develop, grow, and be your whole self, and then bring that.
Be your whole self. America was made for people, no matter how big and disproportionate their personality is, to succeed. That includes us.
Yes. Thank you
just-
guys so much. We are getting so
Do it.
excited. No, this is absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate this conversation. We got a little wrangled at the end, but we'll say that the nugget from that was quick iterations. You can never fail. Be your whole self. We'll leave it at that. And forget. Yes, and all of our panelists are recruiting, and that's really fantastic for us to know as well. So thank you so much. A round of applause for our awesome panelists, Dr. Jackson, Delissa McMillen, Micah Brown. This has been a great conversation. We've had another fantastic panel this morning regarding alternative careers in neuro. We also have a social tomorrow for our members only. I really hope to see you guys there. And thank you so much for joining this whole week. This is the end of the work week for Black and Neuro. We still have events for this weekend, but thank you so much for tuning in. And we're really happy to sit down and talk to you guys and about all of these things. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.